Carlos, welcome aboard to the show. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Ari. Glad to be here.
So, I want to go back quite a few years. You decided to join the police force. What were you thinking when you made that decision?
I was thinking, probably as a lot of young men and women that enter this profession, that you're going to make a difference. You go into it, trying to change things for the better. The side effect is once you leave, you are changed by it. So
Mm.
there is the circle or that life experience, but it thoroughly met every expectation and more from what I thought this job could ever be, and even to where I'm at today. So the life lessons, professional lessons through a career like this were just an amazing time.
And you said changed by it. What does that mean?
Just by virtue of the fact that you will see things that typically no other profession is exposed to. Yeah, I can kind of relate it perhaps to those that have done any kind of military experience, and that more so being the day in day out. I'm going to say the trauma. There's plenty of statistics out there. The average person in their lifetime maybe experiences 5 to 10. The average police officer, it's in the hundreds. So it's a cumulative barrage, if you will, on your senses. It's the type of profession that you go into. People call you because they need you, but a lot of times you see people at their worst. So it's not the positive contact going in to buy a pair of sunglasses. You're going to come out happy because you're looking to look good. I actually wrote a book, but perhaps we can cover that later about it. But it chronicles just the experiences and the changes, I think, for the better. But you do have to have a certain maturity because it's not for everybody. Not everybody finishes his career with a retirement. I think on average, the police officer, at least in the United States, the average male predeceases the average citizen by about a decade still. We're getting better, I think. The hard drinking, smoking, some of the stories that maybe the television has taken some liberties with. It can be a kind of a hard life that way, but I think most folks realize you want to get to that finish line and enjoy that retirement and parlay that to a podcast like I can do with you, Ari.
There's really no good reason that you call the police, right? You're always in need. There's always a problem. You're exposed to the most difficult situations on a day-to-day basis. What's the techniques? What's the tools that, back then and today that we're using to really stay healthy and stay in a good mindset?
A lot of it truly is the mental health, I'm going to say, of the law enforcement professional. It's pretty neglected. The old days was just kind of, you suck it up, you handle it,
Suck
you
it up.
deal with those dead bodies, those kids in pain, those families in pain, and just try to get through the next shift. Now there's a great thing where you can talk to people, right? There's counseling, there's your peers. What a great way to vent, let a little bit of steam off, and also to, I think, healthy relationships in your own personal life. If you go into it with that kind of a foundation, you should be able to weather most of it. We're still human beings, but at the end of the day, it's nice to have that foundation built, that if you know what it's like to be in a family, have that loving spouse to get you through kind of those tricky times, and someone you can speak to, so you don't come home and kick the dog and go for the bottle of scotch. You have to have a balance, and I call it your off-duty life. It's as important as your on-duty life, and you have to care for both of them.
Appreciate that. Thank you. And I think it was, keep me honest here, 3 or 4 years into your career in PD, you made a very interesting transition. Tell us about it.
Yes. So as a young patrol officer in a metropolitan city here in California, Los Angeles suburb, running across the day in, day out investigative roles that your frontline or your primary responding officer will get involved with, but you have to stop and hand it over typically to a detective if it becomes involved. You find evidence of a crime, of a robbery, a murder, whatever the case may be. The patrol officer truly isn't set up for that. They just will triage the intake of that situation and then get it to where it needs to go. And as I found in my last couple years on patrol, just the encounter with narcotics, it was just every day. And I thought, oh, this is something maybe I'm interested in. I think I can make a difference here. And therein lies an opportunity for me to become a special agent with our California Department of Justice. They then, in the 80s, had a Bureau of Narcotic Enforcement. They were the oldest narcotic unit in the nation. We evolved before even DEA. Goes back to the time of the railroads and Chinese heroin and that whole era, the bootlegging era. And so it's a rich history in narcotic enforcement. They were experts. Locals like us would look to them. And I served a few warrants with them as a patrol officer. I had bilingual skills. and was able to help them out. And they ultimately recruited me, and I went to become a special agent for the Bureau of Narcotics.
So, what is it? I think, most of us are fed from very unreliable information, which is CSI and TV and all those
Yes.
things. What does the day in a life of an investigator actually look?
You know what? Hard to describe. I'd almost equate it to if you ever go to an amusement park and go, what ride am I going to go on? You're disappointed by some days it's boring, and then the next ride is just an unbelievable ride. You think you don't know how you're going to survive it. That's pretty much the day. You have a plan, but you have to be trained and be very nimble. Because situations will present themselves, especially in an investigation. You can have the generic. We have a source of drugs. There's a scourge in the neighborhood. Maybe we can help the local police. That's what we would do as in the Narcotic Enforcement Bureau. We would do like a buy program, and you'd send undercover agents into an area and do these corner street buys, try to get at least that initial level of narcotic transactions out of the way, and then work your way up. As you arrest these folks, perhaps someone's willing to talk and inform and not have a harsher sentence, and they could give you someone higher up, someone who's maybe supplying the drugs, and you keep working your way backwards and upwards, I should say. So therein lies a typical roadmap, but sometimes that can happen within a week, a couple weeks, or it may take years, especially if it's a heavy organization, as we are plagued with now in this country. You can see the international drug cartels, Mexico, and then, overseas, it's unfortunately a $1 billion industry, and you're trying to have local and state police departments and federal departments deal with it with their few $1 million budget. So they're typically outmanned, outgunned, out resourced,
Hmm.
but the crooks typically are greedy, and that what usually does them in.
So, you've got the, let's say, street level investigative kind of feet on the ground work, but through that, you're collecting a whole lot of information. And how do you piece that together? You've got video coming off, cameras. You've got a whole bunch of documentation. You have
Right.
access through, federal systems, record history and records. How do you piece that together? And before we kind of get to the really cool stuff that we're doing today, what did that look like, back in the day?
If you ever saw the cartoon The Flintstones, that would be reminiscent of it. You're etching on stone, connecting all these different media, these files, these handwritten logs. They used to call them PAO sheets. Now everything's electronic, and I think we'll go there in a few minutes. But you would draft search warrants to collect documentation, to gather more history, maybe financial history on the organization being investigated or the individual in particular. But it took analysts, it took your fellow detectives, your fellow special agents, and as a team, just scouring that information, devouring it, putting it into linked charts. And there are some computer and some technologies in those days in the last few decades, but nothing like today. I wish I had a tenth of the technology that's here now that didn't exist then, but it worked. And there's also the human intelligence side, which frankly to me will outpace anything AI can ever do because the human being is going to be right there and it's
What's
developing.
the
Yes.
What's the horror story that you were just, I don't know, looking at hours and hours over days at video? Or what's the worst horror story that you can remember kind of combing through data and trying to piece things
I wouldn't
together?
say necessarily horror, but it'll just make your eyes roll backwards, particularly when you're trying to figure out like who these suspects communicate with, right? So you would get phone records, and that's out there. That's a technique. And you go over basically the yellow pages. You get any phone book, name, address, and it can be that thick, and your eyes are just glazing over, but you're looking for that. Okay, maybe there's a frequency report or a frequency activity that counts this person, calls this person every Monday at 4 o'clock. Okay, so maybe, and with that said, it's finding those connections, those relationships, or the anomaly that took the manual searching to do. That was always kind of maddening, but kind of fun where you can narrow down your group. It's like, yeah, maybe we can exclude this person, but we need to focus on this individual.
I'm curious, was it very much like just you working with yourself, or was it almost a team sport?
It was a team sport. My fellow partners had their cases, had their investigations, and it was a luxury to have an analyst assigned to you. And they are brilliant people, smarter than I ever will be, because they aren't bound by the restrictions of everything that we're trying to deal with. They can just focus on an odd shape not fitting in a certain location. It was a team effort, but again, it required so much manual work. Therein lies I think, the burnout factor too. And then the next day, you're having to do the physical work of perhaps there's a surveillance involved, or maybe an undercover situation, or having to go to court and testify, and it's a week-long trial. The case is always evolving that way. But again, be nimble and relying on your teammates. But now with the technology in play, definitely a better time and better equipped to deal with this scourge that's attacking our country and along with other countries.
So over the last 20 years, 20 more years, we had some really nice innovations around DNA and other image analysis. But over the last 3 or 4 years, coming with a really big data analysis through LLMs, the picture has completely changed. What are the kind of stark differences between the 10 years ago and today in regards to how these investigations are conducted?
It's the volume, it's the metadata. You try to exploit a computer, a phone, these records where people are living and doing their criminality online. This is a media that's, it's protected under certain banners of freedom and self expression, but at the same time, they're committing crimes while using it. That challenge is out there, but it's also, too, always a breadcrumb that's going to be left. And if the investigators are smart, which they are, they're getting there. The education, the analysts, understanding this type of technology in play, you can't be invisible today. Your GPS, you want to go somewhere, you plug it in your GPS setting in your car. You've got a history of something there. Your phone, your calls, um, camera on the street. You can't go to London or New York without having somebody catch you on camera scratching your scalp. These are amazing things. They're not meant to spy on people, as some in our country, obviously, here get a little wrapped around the axle about. But it's nice where, hey, there was a murder at 2 a.m., sidewalk shooting. There's a camera out there. Somebody got it. Maybe it was a fast food restaurant or a bank, but that's been very beneficial. Going all the way even to body cameras that are now being worn on patrol officers. The older generation where I came from, some aren't real fans of it. I thought it would be a great thing. I think it is, because a lot of times people will come to that front desk and they'll go, uh, uh, Officer Ari Block mistreated me. He yelled at me and called me names. And a good watch commander sergeant will go, "That's great, sir. Let me go get his body camera. We'll prove it for you." I changed my mind. I'm going to withdraw the complaint. Right there makes it worthwhile. Yeah, conversely, too, if the officer's doing a bad job or some issue came up, you're on candid camera. But I think more times than not, it's beneficial. So the tech is definitely helpful in that metadata world that we're working in right now.
Appreciate that. We say in different contexts, right? There's nothing like sunshine, right? To root
Absolutely.
out. Yeah, I appreciate that. So tell us a few or one story of how technology recently has made the difference, right? Kind of cracked the case or provided you that lead that you really needed. And
Well,
obviously, if the story is not public knowledge, keep it as keep out all the details you can't share.
you bet. And recognize too, I've been out of the game now of a few years. Once I retired from the department, then I can do this consultation role I have. But in working with some agencies that use this kind of technology, I'll say particularly when it comes to look at the school campus shooting that the college student, I want to say was Ohio, Utah. Correct me if I'm wrong. But that situation where they thought, oh, they'll never find him. There was no witnesses. He came in the middle of the night. Technology brought that case together, and they successfully filed on that suspect, and he's going to serve multiple life sentences. I believe he pled out so he could avoid a death penalty. Therein was technology at its best. You could see from even out driving in traffic, his escape route. They put all that together, and that's all in the court systems. That'd be a great case if you had to extrapolate some data on how perhaps they found him, tracked him. But there you go. It's out there, and it's solving murders. It's protecting, keeping the public safe. It's not spying on people like others think they are. The data is out there. It's just for us to use, but to be good stewards of it. You got to be wise about it, legally obtain the information so it's solid and it stands up in court.
I mean, there's a double-edged sword here. I mean, anybody who has gone to London and just seen how many cameras are everywhere, you
Mhm.
don't feel so bad in the United States, but I think the average American doesn't necessarily have that experience. But nonetheless, there's a double-edged sword here. on the one hand, if somebody rams into our car and has damaged us for life, you are hoping that somebody caught that on camera. But on the other hand, we all here in the Americas value our freedoms and privacy. How do you kind of tiptoe that, very sensitive barrier? What's the processes and protocols that are in place?
I think the guide rails in place will always err on, is it legal? Is it moral? Is it ethical? You follow those three guidelines, and then obviously the type of crime you're looking at. It's maybe a kidnapping. Well, okay, someone might get their feelings hurt that they're looking at the camera intersection that they may have driven through because maybe they were drinking that night. Well, they're not looking for the drunk driver. They're looking for that black sedan with tinted windows, and the kid was maybe out in his front yard and was snatched, and there was only three black sedans at night that maybe drove through the intersection. And again, you can do your good detective work, but the technology help. You were looking for some low level or monitor or eavesdrop on some low level person doing something insignificant. So therein lies, I think, the rules of the road, if you will. But to enhance the public safety, especially where life and death is involved, that's huge.
So you said three things, right? It's not just legal. You talked about ethical.
And
What?
moral.
Where do those and moral? Where does the moral and ethical kind of question come into play? Where an officer might be like, technically this is legal, but we shouldn't do this. Do you have any story that you could share?
Well, you know what? The dilemma will always come with, like, for example, I go back to like body cameras. That seems to be an issue where you just can't walk into a hospital, right? You're there. I'm there with family, and it's an ER room, and maybe it's a terrible thing. And then you're on camera all bloodied up. It's like, well, there's a privacy thing. There's a ethical dilemma. Yeah, you're trying to find maybe the crook that ran in there, but you can edit out those things. So there's an easier example of that, perhaps. And along the same things with morality. You're not looking to spy on someone in a very private moment. If officer responds to a domestic disturbance, right? Everyone's quick to say, oh, the cops were awful, but all right, turn on that body camera. And these two are fighting. Maybe the one has a black eye, the one has a bloody nose. You have to show that, but it's in the context of the crime, the public safety, and to prove an innocence or guilt, or at least help get that way. You still have to do more detective work because obviously the medium is still, as you know, is still two dimensional. Ran into this in an incident when I was working some undercover casework 100 years ago, and the wire, you have a wire on typically so you could record a conversation. The camera wasn't quite there, but it was always an option. You'd have juries that would contest it. Well, he looked like he was fine. Well, no, I was dealing with him and his eyes were bloodshot. I could smell the alcohol on his breath. I knew this was going to be a problematic situation. So you have to combine the technology with the human interaction still. It'll never replace the human touch. It can help it, but sometimes it can hurt it too. And that's the thing with body cameras. People rely on that sometimes too much, but the officers can testify to certain things. I'll say in the East, when PCP, if you're aware of that drug, horse tranquilizer in essence, and people would fight and they'd scream, oh, it was brutality. Well, I may have put a few people into a hospital setting because they were on PCP, and he had no idea. Well, I had an exact idea. Body camera at night wouldn't have shown the perspiration, again, the bloodshot eyes, the breath, the heart rate bouncing through the shirt because their heart palpitation because the blood pressure rises. All these objective symptoms go back to the observation of the officer. Camera may not catch all that. Use it to help, again, morally, ethically, and the guide rails are there, but you're not relying on it totally to say, oh, that person should go to jail because I caught him on camera. You still have to do your detective work.
Absolutely. What is the structure? Has the structure of kind of the investigative unit changed over the last 10 years? Are we seeing more separation between field work and technical work because it's gotten so much more complicated?
You know what? I'm going to say not necessarily, but those who migrate into the investigative roles within their agencies typically are looking, and they have shown the talent or the skill, the knowledge and the aptitude, more importantly, really to develop and work that type of police work. Because again, it's talking to people. You still ultimately have to interview victims and witnesses. Computer can't do that. AI can't do that. You can record the sterile conversation. But if there's some subtlety, maybe you indicate, or there's an indication that someone is being dishonest or nervous, you can probe, you can back off a little bit. That kind of skill set, it's still a people-oriented job in that way. The tech helps you, but it doesn't replace a lot of that good work that has to happen. So the investigator is actually probably one of the more well-rounded, not that the patrol officer isn't, but they usually bring that patrol experience to the investigative side. And the more cases they deal with, the better they get, the better they are at cutting through the chase to get right to the heart of a matter.
Appreciate that. Carlos, this has been so interesting. I have two last questions for you before we
Absolutely.
wrap up the show. One is, what's the biggest myth that you would debunk, kind of what the general public watch TV and like you see these shows and it's like, no, that's not what it's like.
Yes. So if I can just put my book up here, The BS Behind the Badge. It's on
There you
Amazon.com,
go.
self-published. It's a light read. Part of the stories that would go with that within the hour, like on a show, badmouth, I don't want to badmouth a CSI show, but typical, the case is solved in an hour. The arrest is made, the interview, and they go to court and it's done. It might take years, as you mentioned earlier in this podcast. There's cases with blood samples and all sorts of other fluid samples that DNA really hasn't come to bear, and it's only happened in the last 5 years, really longer than that, but 5 years even better. Touch DNA, right? So you can get even more detailed. Now they're realizing, wow, we can actually test this. And frankly, it's exonerated some people that shouldn't have gone to jail, but it's also discovered people like, this is our suspect. He's sitting in a jail across the country somewhere, but this is his DNA. That's the beauty of it. But that took decades to happen. So that's part of the BS behind the badge, and that and a whole bunch of other things like the accusations that patrol cops are always looking for the racial issue. And you can look at me as a Latino. My job was never to pull people over because they looked a certain way. I couldn't even probably really see them that well in the car anyway. All I saw was the back of a head. But it's the behavior that initiates the police contact. One of my earlier PCP contacts, and I mentioned this in the book, at 2 a.m., driving around at 10 miles an hour, it's a freezing evening, probably like in the all four windows are rolled down, and this guy's driving and he's got his blinker on. I'm thinking after about 3 or 4 blocks, something's wrong. He's got to be drunk at least. There's an impairment in my mind, more than enough probable cause to pull him over. I pull him over. Right up when I get up on him, he is sweating like he's
Mm.
just been under a heat lamp for 5 hours. And again, it's freezing. I've got my wool jacket on, and I said, let's have a conversation. Under the influence of PCP, he had a big batch of PCP in the back of his car. I actually ended up with a mild exposure of it. I was okay. Was off work for about a week and got back on. But this was in the days where, right, today I would have been challenged for pulling over a person of color driving a car at 2 a.m. But that's okay because that's the behavior. Those are the objective signs and symptoms. Again, legally, morally, ethically, I had the right to do what I did. That's probably a lot of the BS that cops have to deal with. These are people you want as your neighbors, as your kid's soccer coach. Not everybody's perfect. The deaths, unfortunately, at the hands of police shootings throughout the year, maybe, I don't know, I think it's 50 or less. Do you know how many people die at the hands of medical professionals every year in this country? Conservative estimate, 100,000 people a year. We don't put body cameras on doctors and nurses, but the 30 or 40 that die at the hands of cops, we got to put body cameras on them. And I think, too, that emphasizes, too, not that those other jobs aren't important, but the job that we had, it's life and death. So it absolutely should be held to a unbelievably high standard, and it should always be met.
I mean, it's a really interesting comparison because, there is an incredible large of, medical suits against doctors for negligence. And yet you're right. Nobody ever thought of putting a camera in an OR. I mean, I don't know if that exists or
Right.
not, but it's never come to my mind and I've never heard
Yeah.
anybody talk about it. So it's interesting. And the difference in numbers is definitely stark.
Oh, you
Carlos,
bet.
there's one more. First of all, thank you so much for really sharing your story and this incredibly interesting conversation.
Oh, you're
I've
welcome.
enjoyed it a lot. There's one last question that is a very difficult one because it's very personal. If you had to go back to the most difficult part of your life, whether it was 5 years ago or 20 years ago, what is the advice that you would give to yourself?
Frankly, it's the advice that I've lived with my whole life is to be fair, keep an open mind, because the minute you become closed-minded, you're out of this business. You cannot make these assumptions, especially in these life and death assumptions. Going back to, again, someone reaching into their waistband. Okay, well, could it be a gun? Do I kill them, shoot them? No, but you have to wait a split second longer, and that's the difference between courage and fear. The courageous part, you hang on. But should it be an issue where you have to take that life, you did it correctly with everything in your power and in your decision making. So really, the only advice I have is maintain your good character, your solid reasoning ability, and your wits about you, because this is a absolute contact sport. I know we consider ourselves peace officers, but truly you're a warrior first. The peace officer mission is there at the base. Recent shootings here, officers pulling over people, the domestic disturbance again, that seems to be the higher rate of call. I've had a gun put to my face in one of those situations, and we walked away. At the end of the day, didn't have to take that life. It came awfully close. We overcame it, but we went into the situation knowing this could be a reality versus I think there's a little bit of hesitancy, reticence on a lot of officers' behalfs now because they realize, oh, if I make that contact and I'm on the channel, whatever news or a camera is overhead, or my boss is going to say maybe I was a little too aggressive. I think unfortunately we're making our police force a little tentative, and that's what's going to get men and women hurt and killed. They still need to be strong folks, be again moral, ethic, and legal on how they behave, but do it in a way where you come home at night and you cross that finish line and it's worthwhile. And I get to meet folks like you at a Chiefs conference.
Carlos, thank you so much for joining the show and sharing us what an impossible job it is. I appreciate you for joining today.
You're welcome, sir. Look forward to perhaps another time. Have a good evening.
Sir.
Take care. Bye.